Okay then. Hi everyone. The time is 9 o'clock, so let's get started. A warm welcome to everyone to this webinar, Pioneering Natural Language Processes in Swedish Healthcare. My name is Jessica Planefelt and I will moderate today's webinar. Before we get started with all the presentations, please use your real name in Zoom, and you do it by clicking on your screen and on the 3 bullet points, then you can click rename. And please turn off your microphone during the webinar. Use the chat for questions, because we will in the end do a panel discussion, so we will bring up all the questions during that time. And also this meeting will be recorded, so you can see it afterwards if you like, and we will also send out all the presentations shown here today. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the agenda for today, we will start by a short introduction from the project manager of this project, and then we will go on with all our presentations. We will first start with Marcus Lingman from Region Halland, then Magnus Kjellberg from University Hospital of Sahlgrenska. Then we do a quick break, and then we move on to the more technical parts with Olof Mogren from RISE and Anders Arpteg from Peltarion. And then in the end, we will do the panel discussion. But first, a few words from my colleague Ulrika, the project manager of Swedish Medical Language Datalab.
So, good to see you all, and it's fantastic we have so many people joining us today. So a quick introduction. My name is Ulrika Ågren, and I'm heading the Swedish Medical Language Data Lab project. And I will just introduce to you who we are working on this project. So in terms of parties in this project, we have Region Halland, and Region Halland is one of the smallest regions in Sweden in terms of population, but still it's one of the pioneers when it comes to digital health and health data usage. We work also with Sahlgrenska University Hospital, one of the largest hospitals in Northern Europe, known for transplantations and one of the university hospitals with teaching. So it's very great fun to have also Sahlgrenska with us on this journey. Another party in this project is the Public Dental Services of Western Sweden, which is one of the largest dental services of the whole of Sweden, starting out this digital journey a couple of years ago with an insurance system based on algorithms that some of you may be familiar with. In this project, we also have a couple of experts. We have RISE, which is the Swedish Institute for Research, applied research in many, many cases and working with many different industries. So in this case, it's artificial intelligence and machine learning, which is one of the strongholds. We also have Peltarion here, a company that was funded some 15 years ago, focusing on operational applied artificial intelligence ever since, building a lot of knowledge. Everything around crop optimization to spaceship optimization and tumor screening. So they know a lot about AI. AI Sweden is the flagship of Sweden when it comes to knowledge around AI, legal advice, data factory, advice to startups. They're also participating in this project. And last but not least, Sahlgrenska Science Park, that's us. And we are an incubator and accelerator in Western Sweden, promoting growth of life science cluster here. But we're also project arena for knowledge sharing between industry, academia, and healthcare. So that's who we are. And what is it we want to achieve, and what is it we want to talk to you today about? So the objectives when we set out on this journey was really to create machine learning for medical language processing in Swedish. That doesn't sound so big of a deal, but it sure is. But we also want to make data and language models available for training for research purposes. And that can be tricky due to legislation. For many good reasons, it's tricky. And you will learn more about that from our experts today. What we want to achieve in the end, the really good holy grail in the end, so to speak, is around letting artificial intelligence read and analyze medical text in order to predict and improve decision-making in healthcare. It has huge potential. So if we can just take one tiny step on that journey, would be awesome. But that's all for us. Now I'll give you to Jessica again.
Thank you, Ulrika. And if you want to know more about the project or get in contact with Ulrika, please visit our website, sahlgrenskasciencepark.se. So moving on to our first speaker of the day, he is Chief Physician and Strategist at Region Halland. And the main reason for being part of this project is to create new principles regarding how one can strengthen patient safety by implementation of new technology. Please welcome Marcus Lindman.
Thank you, Jessica, and hopefully I'm on the screen now and you can hear me. I would like to spend a few minutes on the Region Halland perspective within the SMS project and why we are in it and what we specifically want to achieve from a healthcare point of view. So I will now share a few slides with you and hopefully they appear on your screen right now. So Chief Strategy Officer, cardiologist by training, been working in this field for a decade by now in managerial positions and as a clinician. And what we realized over the last decade in healthcare is that we want to make it more precise in order to meet the demand of healthcare following the demographic transition, more people needing and wanting more care with a limited number of resources also for taking care of patients in the hospital. And that's the focus for this little talk. And it's all about a larger paradigm that we've been working on for several years now, since 2014, which we call information-driven care. And what's this notion all about? Well, it's working along the value chain of knowledge, which means that you want to work as a healthcare system in a more precise, fact-based, predictive way. And in order to do that, you need to utilize all the data that you have in your healthcare system. And we did that, and I will soon show you in what way. But it's all about taking the dumb data and turning it into information and further into insights so that you can change your behavior, alter the way you deliver care and meet the patients so that the value for the patient increases in relation to the invested resources. And the patient value in this sense is lifespan, longer life and better health. And you want to make sure that you achieve that by also following up, monitoring those endpoints on the data that fed the models, fed the and created the information that eventually altered your behavior, the way you deliver care. So in order to do this, we built we in Halland, we're a fairly comprehensive healthcare system with ambulance care, hospital care, primary care, laboratory care, radiology, etc. We collected all the data that were necessary in order to create those new insights. And in order to do that, you have to have information or data that is multifaceted, that is cross-disciplinary, including resources, provider data, and clinical data, and production data. And the focus today will be on the clinical data, because that's the kind of data we use mostly in order to foresee adverse events. Adverse events in our world is mostly injuries that we want to avoid, for our patients, including pressure ulcers, including infections related to the care, falls, and other adverse events that we want to avoid. So these were the prerequisites and what led us into thinking that we could do more, because in this data, there are two kinds of data. There is certainly the ordered data, the structured data, and there's also the unstructured free text data. And the structured part we used for several years in order to create insights, but the unstructured part remained to be translated into patient value. So we prepared this database with a number of features, including software and other tools enabling advanced analytics, but not to the degree where we actually could use the unstructured data, the free text data. So that's what we wanted to do together in the SMS project. For this purposes, for utilizing the data, we created what we call on this slide in Swedish, the Center for Information-Driven Care. So that's where the team works daily today with these databases. And the team, importantly here, is not an IT team specifically. It's a multidisciplinary team with researchers, clinicians, and different domain experts, including a legal team on top of all the data preparers, data structurers, data presenters, etc., that we have on that team. So this is our key team in order to deliver information-driven, precise care. We also know that the knowledge about doing this is very diverse. We need to collaborate, and the collaboration that is presented today, exemplified by the speakers on the list today, is one part of solving the problem of competence access, because no single organization today has all the competences needed in order to do this journey from data into patient value. So you need a lot of smart people, simply. And we connected with a number of smart people and competent organizations in order to take next step. And as you can see here, Sahlgrenska Science Park and the team around the SMS project is very important in this ecosystem. We already have an ecosystem financed by the Vinnova authorities that is called Information-Driven Care specifically. And the SMS project on our behalf connects very well to this umbrella project that's going on. And as you can see, Vinnova is one of the funders also for this project. So the ecosystem is being built. And as you can see on the bottom here, several of the organizations in this specific project is also connected to the umbrella project in Sweden. So it's much about connecting data with the smart people at the right time in order to create new insights. The insights we want to create specifically in the SMS project is, as I said, how you can foresee which patient, that is, will not fare well and fare as well as we want to in healthcare and the in-hospital care due to these adverse events that I presented earlier. And this is a major problem in Sweden and or across the world. And every adverse events of this type demands a lot of resources. It delays care, it lowers health, and it even shortens lives. So it's important to address this issue. And as Anders will dig into later, this is not only an IT problem or a model building problem. This is a systems challenge to address all the stakeholders, the regulatory frameworks, the technical issues that has to be, that could be seen as obstacles, but needs to be addressed in order to create real value for patients. So what are the constraints? Well, there are lots of them. And over the past years, only within the sphere of AI, EU issued a number of papers guiding and sometimes misguiding the utilization of these very capable tools. And this is the landscape, the regulatory landscape that you need to be able to navigate within in order to not miss opportunities, but also stay away from unnecessary obstacles. And what's mostly on the agenda as we speak are the new proposed laws on applied AI issued from EU just a couple of weeks ago. And this is subject to scrutiny at the moment, but it's, I would say, comprehensive regulatory framework, and it covers not only healthcare certainly, but the healthcare is or will be, according to these frameworks, a high risk organizations or high risk activity, meaning that we need to be really careful on how we use these tools going forward in the area of healthcare. But we also have the new medical device regulations, which were ratified in May 26, so 2 weeks ago, approximately, telling us what need to be done with the modeling before it actually can be turned into a commercial product, if you wish. So things are clearing up, but is getting more regulated. And the key changes that we need to keep track of while applying advanced modeling to real life patients actually affecting their care, because that is the ultimate goal also for the SMS project, is that we need, for example, need to be able to track its effects, how it actually delivers what it's supposed to deliver in terms of safer care in this case. So there is a aftermarket challenge, if you will, also in the SMS project, and we are now in the middle. The pre-work is fairly done. Now we're into the cool stuff. We will hear more about that from Anders and Olof and others. And there is the aftermarket challenge as well that we need to address to monitor the devices. In order to meet the needs to get to the cool stuff, we needed to invest in some hardware for the programmers to play with, and they're now in place and hopefully utilized as much as they barely can. And we also have reached a point where we handle a number of legal issues, technical issues. So we're now into the data, the very real data, and that's where we're looking for the new insights to be leveraged. So in summary, this project is a lot about learning by doing. We knew that this was a minefield, and yes, it was a minefield. It is a minefield, but it's a minefield for everyone. And the winner is the one not giving up. We did not give up. So we're really doing the cool stuff now. And we met a lot of challenges that we hopefully can share and the insights from going forward in this project and others. And my message here is there are a number of solutions when you need to meet those challenges, but they are not that evident always. So for us in Region Halland, this is a stepping stone towards predictive precision healthcare, where we take care of things before they happen in terms of adverse events for patients. And that's my final slide, and I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus. And please use the chat to write all your questions, and we will take them in the end at the panel discussion. So on to our second speaker for today. He is the section lead digital R and DI, leading the digital transformation at Sahlgrenska University Hospital. Please welcome Magnus Kjellberg.
Thank you very much. I guess you can hear me. Yes, I will share my screen then. It's exciting. Can you see my screen? Thumbs up. Yeah, good. So thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me to speak here. It's great to be in this project. It's very exciting collaborations and discussions we have all the time. And so I will give you some overview of Sahlgrenska University Hospital's involvement in this project, and perhaps some concrete examples of what we are looking for and how we are dealing with some of these issues. So just to give you some overview of the Sahlgrenska University Hospital, perhaps not all of you are familiar with us. So we are one of the largest hospitals in Europe, actually, and we are the specialist hospital or the center for specialist care in the western Sweden and the Västra Götalands region, of course. And we have, I think, 7, it says here, national assignments concerning healthcare, but I think we are more than that now. I think so, at least a couple of more I've read on the intranet. And then we are very much in favor of research and innovation, and we are working together with external partners quite a lot, like Chalmers, the companies, and of course the Sahlgrenska Academy. So and AI is one of the sort of focus points when it comes to research and innovation at Sahlgrenska University Hospital. So we are very happy to be involved in this project. And I quite often go back to this slide and this survey that we did 2 years ago almost at Sahlgrenska University Hospital when we wanted to focus more on AI and see what can we do and how can we sort of support the AI work at Sahlgrenska University Hospital. And then we sort of realized that we were not quite sure what was actually going on. How much AI do we actually do? How many projects do we have? And so to our surprise, when we did this survey, we ended up with quite many projects. So at that point, we had 60 projects, and there were like 50 researchers or clinicians that were working in these projects. So we have quite some activity in terms of AI. Most of the projects are in green, which is the diagnostics activities, but it's sort of spread across the whole hospital. And also in this survey, we did some kind of, we were looking for things that would help these researchers and clinicians in terms of what type of support would they need when it comes to using AI more, and in top, AI competence and access to data. So the AI competence is something that is something we have worked with, and also the access to data, of course, during the last couple of years. So one way we are solving this access to AI competence is collaborations. So we have a lot of collaborations with Chalmers University of Technology, of course, Sahlgrenska Academy, a lot of our physicians have also our professors or assistant professors at the Sahlgrenska Academy, so we have a natural linkage to that. And then, of course, we are also working a lot with AI Sweden. So together with AI Sweden, we are involved in 3 projects like information-driven healthcare, decentralized AI, and also this Swedish medical language data lab, which is, so these together sort of gives us a very good sort of starting point for building this AI competence and the support that might be needed by the physicians and the researchers at the hospital. So going back to the data lab. So I mean, the main purpose is we want to do AI and natural language processing, of course, in the medical field. But we need some kind of use cases to do that. We need some kind of questions, research questions, or questions that would help, so where the healthcare and the hospital would be benefited from this kind of AI and NLP methods. So our sort of focus is to bring these use cases, and it's not all just coming up with these research questions. It's also about access to data, IT infrastructure. There are legal questions that we need to handle, and of course information security. So there are a lot of different flavors or angles that we need to make sure to cover when we sort of build these use cases. And as I mentioned, I will go through the Sahlgrenska University Hospital use case, but I will also cover the third, our public dental care use case, that is Bent Pedersen, that is responsible for that one. So we're part of Region Västra Götaland, both the public dental care and Sahlgrenska University Hospital. So a lot of the things that I will go through in terms of IT infrastructure and etc. also applies to the public dental care use case. So when it comes to Sahlgrenska University Hospital, a lot of what we will focus on is the utilization of the electronic health records and the patient journals. So I think Marcus mentioned that you have both the structured part of the electronic health record and as well as the unstructured. So, and the focus here is of course to use the unstructured part as much as possible, but we still have the structured part that we would like to include as well. And the electronic health records, I mean, these have not been, I think that is the case with all systems and all data, a lot of these systems, and when it comes to using AI, is that they were not initially developed to be used in AI projects. So the structure and how data is stored, etc., is perhaps not optimal and requires a lot of work for us to be able to handle in a good way. So the electronic health record is, if you look at it, and this is one patient and one stay, and this patient was stayed in the hospital for 3 days. So each column represents, in this is a plot, and it represents, each column represents a separate hour across these 3 days, and each row represents a variable. So this is the structured part of the electronic health record. So you can see that there's like a pattern here. So each variable can represent like vital parameters like pulse, oxygen saturation. It can also be like diagnosis codes. It can also be like just someone gave the patient food or something. So there are a lot of different variables that is stored in the structured part here, and sort of it forms like a pattern here that you can see across these 3 days. So this is from the admission to the discharge. And also what's available is the free text part. So you have the structured and you have the unstructured free text part. And we would like to explore the free text part a little bit more here, because we believe that there is a lot of information in the free text, unstructured free text, that is not available in the structured, and there's information that we could utilize. So one use case is to use the information available at admission, and perhaps like the first 24 hours or so when the patient has been admitted to hospital. And then we can look both at the structured data and the free text and see, can we predict, like, how long will this patient stay in the hospital, for instance? Can we predict that? Can we predict whether the patient will survive or die? We can also perhaps predict different diagnoses if that's something we would like to do. And so in the admission, like in the admission text, you can see that there are a lot of, this is an example from American electronic health record. So it's not identical to what we are dealing with, but it's an example where you can see that there's like general risk factors and preconditions that's available in here. There's also medications, some symptoms and vitals. So there are a lot of information that could be used that's available in the free text that could be used to do these predictions that we would like to explore. Another one is to actually use the whole stay for the patient, everything that's available, both the structured and unstructured data. And then when the patient is being discharged from the hospital, can we predict what is the risk of readmission within, like, say, 14 days or something for this patient? And that is another use case that we could use. And of course, we could also look at, can we compare what's available, the information available in the structured part and in the unstructured part, to actually understand how much is available in the unstructured part that is not part of the structured that is not available in the structured part. So we can see that, because I think it has been sort of generally believed that there is so much data in the unstructured free text that we cannot use. But is there actually any information? And so it would be interesting to compare these two and also combine them, of course. So for us, and our use cases, we would look in the in-hospital mortality and length of stay, and also the risk of readmission. So these are two different type of generic type of use cases. And we have ongoing projects already at Sahlgrenska University Hospital, where we have like COVID-19 project, where it has been looked at the structured data and doing some of these type of predictions already. So it's quite easy to jump on and use the free text and see whether this project or whether these endpoints would be, we could predict those better. And there's another project also ongoing, which is addiction care, which I will come back to later, where readmission has been predicted. But the focus has not been so much on the free text there, so it's a good use case as well to explore the language modeling. So in terms of practical setup, so initially we thought that, okay, we will just gather the data, we will hand it over to our collaborators, and then they can get started with in their environment and their computers, etc. However, this was a little bit cumbersome legally and administrative to overcome. There are a lot of barriers when it comes to just handing over data. So taking the pragmatic approach, instead we sort of bring in the collaborators into the hospital, so they can sit more or less as employees in our hospital and do the work. And this will make data access and other things more, it would be easier to accommodate that. So it requires some kind of preparation to be able to start doing this kind of NLP and AI work. So the first set is to prepare the data set. So we're working with pseudonymized data, which means that we have removed fields for personal number, name, addresses, etc. And replace that with just a patient ID sequence, or less, like a random sequence ID. We're working with both the structured and unstructured data, as I mentioned before. It might not be that easy to extract both the structured and the unstructured, because it's not evident that they are located in the same database. So it requires quite some work to extract that. The other thing is that we need to define these cohorts in a good way. So like if you say COVID-19 patients, what do we actually mean? When do the test need to be positive? Does the patients need to be stay at the hospital for some time before we actually say that they are COVID-19 patients or not. So there are a lot of sort of small detailed questions that need to be answered. The endpoint definition is not easy, that easy either to define. So we can say, okay, mortality might perhaps not be that difficult, but readmission, it's not easy to always define that in a clear and crisp way. So that is a lot of work going on there as well. We need to structure the data so it's sort of fit for purpose, fit for working with NLP and AI. And of course, not of course, but we need to clean the data as well. And that is not just clean, removing outliers, etc., because that perhaps is not so vital. But the most important thing is, I think, is to look in the free text and the unstructured part and see, can we minimize, look in the data minimization in some way, because in the free text, we cannot be sure that there are no names, the telephone numbers, addresses, etc. So we have a sort of a small part of the pipeline is to actually wash the data and try to remove as much of those entities as possible. I mean, we can never guarantee that we 100% remove them, and we still need to be GDPR compliant, treat them in that way. But we can sort of minimize the risk by removing as much as possible from the free text. So I think that is one of the paths that we are taking right now. And this sort of data set preparation is that is one database administrator or database developer that is doing this. So it's sort of limited to one person employed by Västra Götalands region that is doing this. The second thing is, I think, as Marcus mentioned as well, we need to have an infrastructure that is fit for purpose to do this type of work. So, yeah, Linux server, has been setting up a Linux server. We need to have computing power. So we have acquired GPUs, NVIDIA's GPUs. So we are on the brink of starting this right now, working with this server, and we will look into what type of tools do we need. So Python, of course, so TensorFlow perhaps, etc., and see, can we work with this internally? So our IT department is not perhaps used to this type of requests. They are more used to functional requests and where someone wants to have, we sort of specify the technical details more than they are used to. So this has been like a challenge for us to get through there, but it's very positive now. We have a good backing from the IT department in this type of work now. So. Information security, of course, VPN, user accounts, multi-factor authentication. The server that we're working with is a lot of a dedicated server. There are just a few users that will access that server, so it's very limited. And the users will just be provided with a prepared data set. So they will not look into the database or anything themselves. They just have that washed data set to work with. And then we have the legal ones, so like the project agreement. Every user needs to sign a personal secrecy agreement, so they are treated more or less like employees at Västra Götalands region, having the same obligations as I would have. We have done the risk assessment, data protection impact assessments. We also need to have like legal ground for accessing this data. So it's a personal assignment from the information owner, and we need to make sure, at least in some cases, that we have the correct ethical approval for what we're doing. So by these preparation steps and the use case, we can get on working with the RISE and Peltarian can start working with doing the NLP and the language modeling. And then I just want to say some words about evaluation in principle, because what we're doing right now, we are sort of doing like a retrospective study. We are developing algorithm on a prepared data set already. And I mean, the main part, or like I would say 99.9% of all AI work is being done in this field. And that is because it's quite evident. You have the data set and you work with it as much as possible until you get the good models. However, a lot of bias is probably going into that. I mean, the more you work with data, the less significant your findings will be. So I think what's very important in such an evaluation pipeline is to do like a prospective study. I mean, it could be like compare with the doctor's assessment or something. So do you freeze the algorithm and then you just compare like two arms, you compare with a manual assessment or something, but do that in a prospective way, like we used to do in healthcare, where we do clinical trials. The next step could be like you create like a decision support tool. Could be like risk scoring, could be very simple, like a traffic light system or something. And this tool then could then be used like in pilot study, because we have, so it's important for us to assess and understand whether such an algorithm that we develop, I mean, even though it might have extremely good performance, will it fit into our internal processes? How do we actually work in the hospital? And it might be that it doesn't, and then we might need to rethink about the benefit of using that type of algorithm. Or it might be that we might need to change the way we are working, and because that might be the optimal way. But it's important that we sort of evaluate such an algorithm in the proper environment, like real world environment and real world data and real world healthcare workers. And I just want to say that one of the projects that or the use cases that we are proposing here is the risk of readmission in addiction care. So this is has been an ongoing project for a couple of years. So Mikael Mide, who is sitting there with the computer, he has been the project leader there, and I think this was published in Dagens Medicin quite recently. So it has been an ongoing work, and it has been working with mainly with the structured data, but to some extent also with text data. So it has been some kind of text topic modeling, document to vectorization of text, looking at concepts in text and feature importance, etc. But I think we would very much would like to see, can we excel the performance of this method by doing sort of state-of-the-art language modeling. We think there might be a very good opportunity to do this, but yeah, and we are very happy that we could get help from RISE and Peltarion to do this. And then some final words about the public dental care use case. And Bent Pedersen sent me this slide, so I will mostly just read through these points, I guess. So the goal here is to reduce the prescribing of antibiotics and only give antibiotics on the right indication. And we want to use AI search to search through all the patient's daily notes and the records, and see if these prescriptions and compare these prescriptions with the indication with the Swedish Medical Product Agency to see if it was the correct one. And then the results can be submitted to all the clinics to carry out some kind of quality work, and so they can, so the way of how they are working with better adherence to the current indications, and according to the Swedish Medical Product Agency as well. And in the long term, perhaps this could be transformed into or used as a decision support in real time. And by that, I thank you for your attention. And let's see, yeah, I will stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Magnus. Our third speaker for today is the senior researcher at RISE, and RISE is a part of the project to explore and develop current state-of-the-art techniques for natural language processing applied on Swedish medical language data. So please welcome Olof Mogren.
Thank you for the introduction. So yes, I work as a research leader at the Center for Applied AI Research at RISE. And we are a collection of researchers working on different aspects of AI. And we have a load of collaborative research projects around applied AI, similar to this one. Although I think this one is particularly nice to work with all the interesting people, with people such as Marcus and Magnus on the healthcare side, like you have already seen with their nice perspective on the whole process of the whole information pipeline. So, medical language. Electronic health records, as Magnus and Marcus already talked about, is of course really nice because we get the health records in a computerized form, which is searchable and suitable for automatic analysis. About 70% of the information in the health records are in these free text forms, which then, of course, also gives some challenges as interpreting free text natural language with a computational method is a difficult task. Also, this information is obviously very sensitive, and giving medical recommendations is a really critical application, and this requires both explainability and correctness. Although neglecting to employ these kinds of techniques may also lead to inferior care. So then we have the Swedish Medical Language Data Lab, where we work on making medical language data sets available. We work on developing data-driven methods for life science. The project is also about the technical, legal, and ethical processes, and so far that's taken up quite a bit of the work in this project. Enable the sharing of sensitive training data is, of course, may sound like an impossible task, but I think I will get into a little bit of how we are approaching that at the moment. So yes, we have a number of challenges, and Marcus and Magnus have already talked about some of them. The data access, the privacy of the data is of course very critical. For implementing NLP methods, natural language processing methods, we have the challenges of the domain-specific language. We have specific language as used by medical doctors, by nurses, by dental doctors, as seen in these health records. We have also the challenges of developing explainable methods, methods that can give uncertainty quantification of their decisions, also methods that are bias-free and fair to the extent that's really possible. Okay, so language. This is a word cloud plot from the Swedish Wikipedia, and because this project is about the Swedish medical language. So this is Swedish language, which is not medical. Är is obviously a very common word in Swedish. Och, i, av, den, so on. Genomsnitt, underarter, kallaste, ligger, meter, trakten. Really common words that's hardly surprising to people who have seen a little bit of Swedish language. Now, if you look at for example, dental health records, it can look like this. Yeah, so this plot is made from statistics from real dental records. It's also filtered on the most common stop words as based on another corpus. Here we see a number of medical terms, so it means that we have a specific vocabulary. Some of the ones, these terms are obviously something that we as a lay person can understand. Akut, recept, tablett, utförd, possibly also extraktion, KV-penin. But then you see a lot of abbreviations that may seem a bit more weird. I was actually looking at PC. Are they referring to computers here? But they are not. They're referring to paracetamol. Yes. PAT is abbreviation for the patient. There are a lot of abbreviations, a lot of special terms, and these are things that we need to consider when we work on natural language processing for these, as many tools that you take off the shelf are trained on standard vocabulary data sets. Okay, so I want to take a few steps back, and natural language processing is regarding the problem of understanding language, or at least processing language. This is a central part of artificial intelligence, as shown both from the Turing test in the 50s and Chardelou in the late 60s, which was an actual implemented system which interpreted commands made in natural language. So you could tell the system, pick up a big red block. And the system says, okay, and it puts its arm out and picks out a red box. 95, Deep Blue won over Garry Kasparov in chess. 2012, a deep neural network beat the existing champions on image classifications. 2013, we started to get learned word representations, word embeddings into the mainstream NLP pipelines. And 2015, AlphaGo beat Lee Sedol in the game of Go. In 2017, we had a breakthrough in language modeling with transformer models, which have ever since been the state of the art on language generation, translation, text classification, and so on. One of the trends from these, as you can see in this slide, is that we go from things that are rule-based. So the Chardelou system was entirely hard-coded. They defined a programmer defined the grammar of the language, and you had to obey to that grammar to be able to make commands to the system. The Deep Blue computer was based on statistics. It had looked through a large number of earlier chess games, but later on the solutions became more and more learned from data. So in the last few years, 10 or 20, a lot of the learning part that is actually replacing a lot of the older systems has been with deep learning. And this is a sequence of data transformations. They learn to represent data internally, and they are behind many of these breakthroughs. So many times when you see headlines about AI in the news, it's actually deep learning under the hood. So natural language processing, as I said, is making sense of natural language. It has also undergone this process from the early rule-based systems to more statistical or count-based systems to more learned systems, which are based on deep learning. And the transformer method model that I mentioned, it was presented in 2017. It's been the basis for solutions such as BERT, which you may have heard of. And this has been the state-of-the-art results in reading comprehension, natural language inference, translation, and so on. We get rich embeddings for language tasks. That is, we get numerical representations which a computer can use, which include the information that we need from natural language. And we no longer need to write the language entirely correctly according to a grammar, but it's trained on real language that people use, and thus it can also adapt to language that people use. We can also do transfer learning using these. That means that we can train them on one data set, and then we can fine-tune them or just use them on another data set. So one of the questions in this project is how can we best adapt these to the Swedish medical language? The Swedish language is not as studied as the English language, although there are some models for Swedish language. Swedish medical language is even more a fringe of this, as we have more specific language. Okay, so in this project, we have 3 different cases. We have already talked about them this morning. So the first one in this list is the prescription of antibiotics in the Folktandvården. They have 1.7 million dental visits per year in VGR. And the question is to look at prescription or overprescription of antibiotics in dental care. So there is an anonymized extracted data set with correctly prescribed, incorrectly prescribed, and not prescribed antibiotics. And the goal is to build support system or some kind of an audit to analyze the prescription in afterwards. There has been some data analysis on this, and I think Anders will talk more about this later. The second case is the addiction clinic readmissions, which Magnus just talked about. So the prediction of readmissions from people who are at the addiction clinic. There are some challenges. We have some unbalanced data, and we have some different fields in the data set, which could be useful. The diagnosed codes, medication codes, and so on. As Magnus mentioned, there are some preliminary results here as well. The third case is the adverse events in healthcare, which Marcus told you about. I don't think I need to add so much about this. We're looking at the pressure source, and we hope to be able to find the uncategorized adverse events. We hope to find patients at risk of getting adverse events before it actually happens. That's obviously the end goal and the really nice end goal. Okay, so there's been a lot of challenges that's turned up. Some of them we could think about beforehand. One of them is that it's difficult to moving sensitive data. As Magnus said, we're no longer moving the data outside of the hospital. We're moving the competent people into the hospital. So that's the strategy at the moment. There are regulation reasons for this. It's about privacy and it's about ethics. There are also some technical strategies that we take with regards to the privacy and with regards to the difficulty of moving data. One of them is federated learning. This is a strategy for training machine learning models where you train them where the data is. When you have trained your model, you can send it to a central server, and the central server can aggregate many of these models and then distribute them out, which means that the end result, the models that has been trained using the federation, can actually have benefited from the collaboration and from the additional data that's been used in the federation. It also gives some privacy effects, as you don't need to send the raw training data outside of your organization. I hear an echo myself. I hope it goes away. It also can give some communication efficiency and leverage compute that you have on several different locations. Okay, so one of the results we have in the federated learning is a publication that we've done with Beltarian, where we train large transformer-based language models in a federated setting. We have seen that this is feasible for several of these variants. As you can see the results, To the right, we have 3 different data sets. We have the accuracy in the top one, and we have in the bottom row, we have the rounds until you reach 90% accuracy. So as the number of clients increase, the accuracy is a bit hurt by this, especially for one of these methods. But we can definitely leverage these models and we can make them work in a federated setting. Another result we have in federated learning is for personalization and privacy in a paper that we have done and submitted, which works on balancing the local training and the federated training, where you can have a specific data set that is entirely local and that leaks no information to the central server. And then you have a second data set which is less private and which can take part in the federation. A third result we have in federated learning is this paper on peer-to-peer decentralized federated learning, where we do away entirely with the central server. And we have developed an algorithm that automatically decides which clients are useful to collaborate with. Some other results are about how we ensure the privacy in the training data. Obviously, you could just trust all partners and encrypt the communication. And in some settings, that may be actually doable. You can utilize some approaches for differential privacy. So differential private stochastic gradient descent is a possible strategy for this in the federated setting. The balanced version I mentioned before is the semi-federated learning. And you can also utilize privacy ensuring transformations. And that can give a trade-off between the accuracy and the privacy. And this can be learned systems, or it can be rule-based systems, as it's there's a change going on in that field as well. Obviously, manually masking and obfuscating training data. Okay, I think I was muted, so I hope you heard. But manually masking and obfuscating training data as was done in the Netflix competition, can sometimes work. But in the case of the Netflix competition, this was demonstrated that this is not always the way to go. You always need to know your data. You need to know your training. What's happening? Where is the information flowing? So we're writing a report currently with AI Sweden and Max about the legal aspects of machine learning, and specifically federated learning, and how this relates to the GDPR. I mentioned before privacy mechanisms. So one of the flavors of privacy mechanisms is adversarial representation learning, where you train 2 different models. You train an adversary that learns to detect the private information, and then you train a transformer, or you train a model to transform the data from to make it difficult for the adversary to find the sensitive information. So in the image to the right, we have an example from images where the smiling attribute is censored from the image, and the rest of the information is supposed to stay in the image. In the image to the left here, we see results from Zhang and Friedrich, where they use a similar model, similar approach to train embeddings or representations for language with an adversary that makes the model better at hiding the sensitive information. So thank you for listening today, and stay tuned for the second webinar this fall. I think we'll have a lot of more interesting things to say then, and we're only getting started here.
Thank you so much, Olof. Before moving on to our last speaker of the day and the panel discussion, we're going to take a short break. So stretch your legs, get a cup of coffee, and I'll see you back here in 10 minutes at 10:15. Now I have my microphone on mute while I was talking, but now we are back, and we are gonna present our last speaker of the day. He is the head of research at Peltarion, and the main reason for being a part of this project is to using AI to empower us humans and solve important healthcare problems. So please welcome Anders Arpteg.
Thank you very much, Jessica. And let me just share my screen here very quickly. And hope you can see my screen, otherwise just shout out. And yeah, for once, pleasure to be here, of course. And I will give a quick update from Peltarion's side. As you see on this slide, we actually call this SMS project for BERT internally, but it is the same project that we're speaking about. We, of course, work very closely with all the stakeholders that we have in Region Halland and Sahlgrenska and Folktandvårdens, etc., and RISE, of course. So, and Olof and others have already spoken a lot about them, and I will try to do my best not to repeat what already has been said, but just provide some additional complementary details. And I can also say that we in Peltarion work with a number of these more large-scale, multi-year projects like this. And an interesting question then is not only about how to produce a data set or a model, but actually how do we disseminate or share the knowledge and the results from projects like this? And try to make these results as useful as possible, both for partners working internally in this project, but also, especially, I would say, for everyone else externally, to be able to share the results as efficiently as possible. And that's not an easy thing to do. And it's important that we focus on the right challenges to make the results as useful as possible. And the visualization, as you see here in this slide, which you also saw from Marcus' presentation before, tries to describe the complexity of having what we in Peltarion called an operationalization of AI systems. And that means that we need to be able to actually have true proper value in the organization itself by using data and AI. And there are, as I said, many more challenges than just delivering a data set. It's more than just delivering a model, and it's certainly more than just delivering a code repository. So in this project specifically, there has been a lot of other challenges like legal consideration, of course, when working with so sensitive data as we have here. And also, how do we collaborate between large organizations like we have here in Folktandvårdens and Region Halland, Sahlgrenska, RISE, and Peltarion? It has taken some time to figure all this out, but hopefully this will actually be very valuable lessons learned for other similar projects and organizations in the future. And for one, we of course need to handle all the legal challenges that we have. But I think it's also important to say that it's not just about regulating against using sensitive data. It's not just about trying to require more complicated legal agreements between partners to be able to do this. We can actually find novel ways of doing it by taking advantages of all the technology that are coming up. So if we can use technology to enable working with sensitive data in a safe way, and still be able to innovate, how we can use data and AI together with humans, then we can have a really beautiful future where we can use data and AI for helping out with a lot of medical and healthcare use cases. And I think an example of that could be the Federated learning project that we already heard quite a lot about. I think I skipped this slide. We've heard so much about that already. This one is just the same again. And just to reiterate a bit more, remember, it's not just about the data. It's not just about the model or the code repository. We need to handle, of course, the legal challenges, but it's more than that as well. To truly find value, you actually need to put this AI-enabled system into production. And usually that involves so much more work than just working with the data, preparing the data, and training the model. There was a famous paper from Google in 2015 called Hidden Technical Depth of Machine Learning. And that basically speaks about the actual model training part is about 5% of the work necessary to actually put something in production. And it's important, I think, that we try to address as many of these as possible and share our learnings and best practices about this to truly find the value of all the work that we're doing. And certainly, last but not least, to focus on the organization as well and the people inside it. We need to have like a basic understanding of AI, not the deep technical understanding, but the basic understanding of what AI is and what it can and cannot do throughout the whole organization. We need to organize, the teams appropriately in the organization and basically have a well thought out change management strategy for moving into a future where data and AI are hopefully becoming natural components of every kind of product and service that we have. So if we do this properly, I think we have a really good chance of being successful in moving towards an AI-enabled society. Let me just quickly introduce what Peltorion is as well. And this is actually a company that's been around since 2004. And in the beginning, it was mainly the two founders that had a consultancy firm that also focused a lot on the latest type of technology, neural networks, long before deep learning became popular. So they always focused on the latest type of AI techniques, but they also had the other idea of to actually build AI system is too complicated. So we need to have better tools and better environments to build this kind of AI-enabled system. So they already from the beginning started to work with something called Synapse, which is a .NET desktop application that simply tries to make it easier and more efficient to build AI-enabled systems. But then as all the huge advances that we have seen in AI in just the recent 10 years, if you recall the slide that Olof showed before, we can also see how a few selected companies are really accelerating in their use of data and AI. And I'm speaking specifically about the tech giants, the Google, the Facebook, the Microsoft and Amazons of the world, and also the Chinese ones, the Alibaba, Tencent, and Baidu, etc. They are today, the most valuable companies of all. If you look, if just Google for the most valuable companies and see in Wikipedia, you will see exactly these companies in top 10. I think there is one other company, Warren Buffett still have a finance company in there, but otherwise, they are all tech companies. And we can also see that most other companies that tries to make use of especially the latest type of AI techniques, they fail. And this is a problem that also the investors starting to see in 2015, 16. And they recognize that the major problem is that we need better tooling to truly make these type of AI techniques available for all. They basically asked the founders, can you now stop being a consultancy firm and now be a company that really builds a tool, a platform that enables anyone and everyone to start making use of these techniques? And they said yes. And then we received a lot of money from EQT and Wallenberg and an American fund called Euclidean. And we've grown from 2 people to over 80 people today. And we basically have 2 big teams. One is the engineering team building the tooling and the platform to make it easy for anyone to start using these techniques, and also a big research team that tries to focus on specifically research questions related to operational AI. The questions that is the main challenge for companies to find true value. And then we have a lot of projects like the BERT projects and others that we work with there. Okay, let me quickly move ahead and speak about one of the use cases. So in the Folktandvården, the antibiotics use case, we have already seen or heard a bit about that, so I won't repeat that. But if you look at the specific slide here that we have, so one of the ideas of the best practices work, this kind of map that I showed in the beginning, is that we should try to have a nice use case library or a way to Sorry here. I think I lost my screen now. Can anyone say if they still see the screen? Jessica or someone?
No, we
No.
can see.
No, it's black.
Yes, it's black for me as well. Let me stop sharing and resharing and see if that works. Cool. Okay. I hope you can see the screen again.
Yes, we do.
Awesome. Okay, so what I said was that for this Folktandvården use case, we need to have a format, a way to build up like a use case library, and in that way share knowledge and share information in an efficient way. So the idea is then to have information like this. So this is an example of how it could look like, with a very brief description of what were the main kind of challenges that we worked with for this use case, and also this kind of fact sheet to the right that tries to address, these are different parts of this big map that we have been working with, and then have links to more information and to contacts that people can reach out to if they want to know more about how this project looked like. And for one, of course, we need to focus on the challenges that we said in the legal aspects, but also how we work to set up this kind of in-house processing of the data that we heard a bit about, and also how to adapt this kind of language model to technical or to medical domains. But another part of the question that we have focused quite a lot about in Peltarion is how can we make use of explainable prediction techniques to try to understand why did a model make a certain prediction. So if a model says at some point, I think you should prescribe antibiotics, but if a model cannot describe why it could, wants to prescribe antibiotics, then it will be really hard for the users of these systems to actually trust it. And it's also very hard when developing a model if you can't really understand why and how the model works. And luckily, there's been significant advances in explainable predictions and explainable AI in recent years that allows us to basically highlight in the input, what is the model actually looking at when making a certain prediction? And we have been exploring these techniques, partly by these so-called attribution-based explainable prediction techniques that basically highlights the input in the journal text directly, what the model thinks are the positive drivers and the negative drivers for a certain prediction. And then we could see that one major part of what the model looks at is actually the names of the medical doctors itself, rather than the rest of the journal text. And you can try to guess why that is. Perhaps some medical doctors, prescribe antibiotics more than others, but that's not actually what we want the AI model to look at. We want to actually make the model look at the proper part of the journal text, and then we need to do something. So we got a question, I think, before in the chat about if we can use named entity recognition to do anonymization in some way, and this is specifically what we did in this case. So we train a model to try to identify named entities like the name of the doctor and then remove them. And then in that way, we can remove these kind of unwanted biases from the data, and then have the model looking at the proper part of the journal text. And then hopefully we have a better way to make predictions that is of more use for Folktandvården. Similarly, if we take the Region Halland use case, we in this case are interested in this kind of adverse event minimization problem. And in this case, it's another challenge that we focus on at Peltarion quite a lot, which is we have about 2 million journal texts. Some of them are annotated, labeled, but very few are positively labeled. So we have like 300 journal texts that are positively labeled as adverse events. And then I think we have like 200,000 negative ones. But then it's a challenge from a technical AI point of view. How do you train a model when you only have like 300 positive events? And what they potentially want to do here is also to, given that we have just these few hundreds of positive events, can we find additional ones in the whole set of 2 million journal texts that were historical adverse events that, if I understand them correctly, would be of use for them. So we have been looking into something that we call the label reconstruction problem, in being able to see how can we train a model so that it can reconstruct destroyed labels to in that way work with a very, very few number of positive labels and still be able to find additional positive labels that we have in the full data set. You can see some of the results here. It's a bit technical, but I'm happy to go more into depth if anyone wants to know more of what we're trying to do here. Hopefully this can be of real use for Region Halland later. I see I speak usually too much, and I'll try to be really brief. We have done a number of other medical use cases in Peltorian. One was for the Swedish central bank, Riksbanken, that wanted to track what is basically the sentiment of Corona. And we can do sentiment prediction rather easily, but we also try to do something else, which is try to measure toxicity. What is basically the level of toxicity in Twitter tweets when speaking about Corona, and then see, can we track that in real time? So this is actually something that is deployed and running on the Peltorian platform, and it's integrated to Riksbanken's c19impact.com website that you have, which you can go to, and it's running in real time, and you can see how the sentiment and the toxicity goes up and down over time. I think I skipped this one for now. Let me then go to some more specific techniques that we are focusing on. We have partly been speaking about federated learning already, so I don't think we need to say much more about that, but you can see here the slide in this kind of use case library format with some of the few main research questions we're looking into, and also in the fact sheet to the right, you see the details about, we're working with legal challenges and trying to find increased privacy by using federated learning techniques, different models we're looking into. But specifically, we have links to more information. So we have links here to the paper and presentations and videos, and also to contacts that if you can reach out to if you want to know more about this. Here is another one about explaining predictions. So for explaining predictions, there are a number of different types of techniques that you can use for this. The one I spoke of before, usually called attribution-based, and techniques such as SHAP values or integrated gradients, they basically highlight in the input to show what the positive and negative drivers are for a specific prediction. But there are some other interesting techniques as well, more generative and abstractive techniques. So there is a model called WT5. And what that can do is it doesn't only highlight in the input, it actually generates natural language text describing why the model thinks it should make a certain prediction. If you try to read the green boxes here, it says basically explain sentiment : and some text. So the explain sentiment prefix in the beginning basically tells the model, now you should do a sentiment prediction, but you should also explain it. So then the model replies first with negative. So it was a negative sentiment. And then explanation : it says the acting was terrible. And the acting was terrible is not part of the original input, as you can see. It's actually a new formulation, a generation of an explanation in natural language describing why the model thinks it should be a negative prediction. This is really cool stuff and also rather hard, but we have a PhD student looking into this, how to transfer partly to the medical domain. And we have a paper about that already. And we're also looking into how to move to Swedish to support that for this really, really cool stuff, if I may say so. Yes, this was another system. I see the time is flying away here, so I think I skipped that. If you want to read more, this is more about seeing how we can use NLP or language model like BERT for tasks like question answering. So then, given a short question, find an answer in a larger piece of text, and also how we can adapt the model to more medical domains. So we had some work previously done in this area. So in summary a bit, when working with all these kind of projects, we want to, for one, come up with like a use case library, trying to have a very concise and easy to read and not these kind of long reports or a research article that no one reads, but like a concise summary, trying to describe, these are the main challenges and questions we're working with in this project, and some links to more information and contact people. And hopefully in that way, we can inspire other organizations and projects in what's possible to do with AI, and hopefully reuse some of the results that we have come up with in this and other projects. Besides having a use case library, we can also try to come up with some set of more generic guidelines, a set of best practices. And don't take these examples of best practices as the final product. It's just an example of what could like a general set of best practices look like. And if we want to take the specific challenge of accessing the data, here are some example of best practices that federated learning could be useful to keep the data in safe. And also these kind of in-house processing techniques could be really useful one that hopefully other organizations in the future can also make use of, since and all the results and experience that we have from this project in doing so. And similarly for data annotation, we have some best practices in other best practices for how to train a model and what to do and what not to do, and if you should use multilingual model or monolingual models, or should you use BERT. And there's so many different questions that we can try to summarize in some set of generic best practices. And if we had more time, I would be happy to speak more about the whole process of going to production to actually find true value. In Peltorium, we try to split it up at least in like 3 different phases. So the prototype phase is basically not touching the production system at all. We work in separate systems, potentially by extracting the data or working in-house as we're doing in this project. And in that way, it enables very quick experimentation. But what we really want to do is move to pilot as soon as possible, where the real domain experts can evaluate and interact with the system. So we have a proper understanding of what is really of use or not. But going and touching some kind of production system is of course much more time consuming and requires much more work. But as soon as we have some initial results from a prototype that potentially is interesting, it would be great to move to a pilot where you have a minimal integration to the production system. So we can start evaluate in a small scale setting. And then going to full scale production is of course lots of work, but that is when the true value will start to happen. There is much work going on right now in trying to merge the software engineering field with AI. And there is one term that we use often, which we call AI engineering. It's similar to operational AI. We actually had a conference in last month in May this year in one of the biggest software engineering conferences called ICSA, International Conference of Software Engineering, where we had a workshop specifically about AI engineering, and Peltorium was part of organizing and the program committee for that as well. So a lot of things are happening now. And if we do this right, we can start making data and AI a natural component of any product and services that any company have. And hopefully we can start to, instead of having these very immature tools that we have today for the latest type of AI, we can start to build up more mature tools, and it becomes like a natural component in building any kind of system in the future. So with that, I think I have just 1 minute to spare. I just like to close with the same kind of best practices work slide again. And remember that, although we may be focusing to a large extent on the data and the modeling part so far in this project, we have spent a lot of time with the legal acts, the legal challenges that we have. How do we apply with the regulation? How can we keep the data safe and the privacy secure? And how do we have data access and work with data, even in a more like external collaboration format? And this kind of federated learning techniques and in-house processing methods that we use, I think and hope, can be really useful for a lot of other organizations and projects in the future. So trying to have this more holistic understanding of what are really the challenges to find true value, and also having the best techniques that we can to share the results. And we are working closely with AI Sweden that is also helping out right now to build a more of a use case library in this way. So if we continue doing that, I think we could look at a beautiful future where the results are shared and people are starting to move to an AI-enabled future where data and AI is in the service of humans. with that, I thank you for your attention and happy to answer any question.
Thank you so much, Anders, and thank you so much to all our speakers today, Olof, Anders, Marcus, and Magnus. And all the presentations shown today, as well as the recorded version, will be available afterwards, and we will send them out to all of you. So moving on to our last session of the day, the panel discussion. Ulrika, do we have any questions in the chat?
Yes, actually we do. So we picked some questions from the chat, and you can also continue to ask questions in the chat. So please do. So we had a question from Petter to, I think Anders answered it. It related to pseudonymization of free text data from text records. If there is any available standard, or how can you make that available? Is there any such thing? So is there anything you would like to add, Anders and Petter, on that?
Yeah, I can continue a bit. For using named entity recognition, there are a lot of annotated data sets in English, of course, but to support the Swedish language and the medical language, the more domain-specific language, we may need additional data sets to do that well. However, by making use of techniques such as multilingual models, we can potentially train a model with English annotated data and directly apply it for Swedish text. It's not optimal, and we wish we had, more annotated data in Swedish as well. We do actually have some Swedish near data sets that we can make use of. But one of the ideas and focus areas that we have in Peltorion is also to look into these kind of multilingual approaches. So they are surprisingly powerful, and a single model can work with hundreds of languages, and you can train it in English and apply it in Swedish and German and Finnish and whatnot. And then potentially, if you want to improve it, you can just add a small amount of Swedish annotated data, but you don't need to have the full data set in Swedish with annotations. And I think that's really a powerful technique that enables AI for so many more use cases.
Thank you, Anders. I think that was a very elaborate and good answer.
Perhaps I could comment a little bit there, because it was about anonymization. I don't think we will ever consider these, not ever, but we will not consider at this point at least, these texts as being anonymized, because we cannot guarantee that there are no names or personal identifiers, etc. But it's a way of de-risking or minimizing the use of or minimizing the risk of having to see any kind of personal or sensitive information. So I think that is the purpose right now, because anonymization is much more cumbersome than just doing removing 95% of the names, for instance. So
yeah, I can and just add to, when working in Spotify, we took this very seriously, and of course just removing the names or the email addresses or phone numbers is certainly not sufficient to anonymize data. There can be other things like the gender or the age of the person or the address or so many other parts of the information that could still, from a GDPR point of view, be PII, personally identifiable information. So it's certainly not sufficient from like a GDPR point of view to do this, but it helps. And it helps, for example, with de-risking, as you said, Magnus, but also in training the model to make it focus on the right aspects of what the information it should look at and not look at. So it's not the solution for everything, but it helps in some ways.
I guess you can talk about layers here. You can do anonymization, and you can keep the data in a safe or secure place as possible, but you probably have to combine those different techniques in a way. We also had a question regarding Millennium, that is the new electronic record system for patients in VGR, Västra Götalandsregionen, and if it will be more compatible than previous system with artificial intelligence. And I think we had a response to that not necessarily. It will be more standardized in a way that it will be less free text and maybe more structured data than unstructured data, if that's correct. Then we had a question from Milan, I think. It's around what kind of impact can we expect from federated learning on explainable AI and explainability mechanisms, e.g. hybrid techniques or adversaries. Anyone? I think it's Olof. It's directed to Olof.
I can begin. I think we can expect a lot from explainable AI in the future. I think there's tremendous progress being made there. I think in specifically to federated learning, I don't think it doesn't affect each other that much. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there's being a lot of nice explainable AI being done, and I think there'll be a lot more in the future because there's a lot of interest, and I think there's a lot to be done there.
Thank you, Olof. We have some additional questions.
Yes, from Ricky. How GPT-3 or GPT Neo performs on Swedish, and have you tested with that?
Yeah, I can start, I guess. My hate question number one, perhaps. How can GPT-3 be used in this case?
Apologies, Anders, but it's a tough word out there.
No, it's always, it comes up every time, but it's good. So GPT-3, of course, was not trained for Swedish and does not work well. And even if it were English, I would not recommend using GPT-3 in this case. There are so many other models that are better in terms of accuracy. It's easy to work with. It's, doesn't require hundreds of machines to do single inference on. You can train it on single GPUs. And you can, with other models like T5 or XLMR or whatnot, actually train it and fine tune it on your own data. And as soon as you do that, it will significantly outperform GPT-3. So GPT-3 is cool from many aspects, especially more philosophical. And if you're interested in finding AGI, but from a practical point of view, I would not recommend it. And we can see what like MT5 and others are doing. They have models in sizes that are suitable to use, and you can fine tune them on medical data, for example, or whatever use case you have, and then have a practical use for them. And they perform better and easier to use. So yeah, that's my quick rant, at least, about GPT-3.
Perhaps I can add a little bit to that rant. I agree with everything Anders says here. And my point is that all the models that we mentioned now, MT5, BERT, GPT 1, 2, 3, all of these are transformer-based models. So they are the same architecture. The main difference between the GPT-3 and the rest is that GPT-3 is humongous. It's tons of parameters, and it's really computational demanding to train it, which has shown that it can generate text, which is pretty nice. But as Anders says, it's not going to make an impact in the kinds of analysis that we need to do in this project. The transformer architecture, though, that makes a difference.
Yeah. And there is, the top Chinese and American companies are, fighting to be the biggest one. And I think the latest one is from China, Budao 2.0, which has 10 times the size of GPT-3, 1.3 trillion parameters in it. And it's also multimodal, which is actually really interesting. But of course, not in any way of practical use or of something that we would use, for example, in a project like this.
You probably wouldn't run that on your ordinary desktop, I guess. That probably crashed out quite a few times.
I'd like to see a mobile phone. Yeah, sorry.
Even a mobile phone app. Yeah, that would be really awesome. Another question, maybe a bit more high level, touching on what you just said in relation to big players. Who can we see, or who is taking the lead in this when it comes to natural language processing in healthcare? Is it public sector? Is it industry? Is it some sort of helix construction? I would like to ask maybe Marcus about that.
Well, there is no single player that will play the only main role, I would say. There needs to be components in the ecosystem that goes together, and there really need to be coordinators for this. And the Sahlgrenska Science Park is one of them. Certainly AI Sweden is another, but as the situation is right now, the request, I believe, needs to come from the regions, the main healthcare providers, to initiate and explain the needs, the bonfire to gather around. But then we only can provide so much capacity and knowledge. So we really need to tie up ourselves with the rest of the experts on this panel, for example.
I'd just like to add, I think we need to start collaborating a lot. I think this project is a great example of what can happen and how to do this type of collaboration, and especially what AI Sweden is doing in trying to find, who should collaborate with whom is a super important and yeah, very useful way of organizing this. And perhaps that can be Sweden's strength, so to speak, compared to other countries, that we have a better coordination and try to find and reuse information that we have from projects like this. I certainly hope that's the case and believe it could be.
How would you say that we are doing in terms of when comparing to other countries? Are we in the driver's seat of NLP in healthcare, or are we kind of left behind, or are we somewhere in between?
If you ask me, I mean, of course, France and Germany and Britain are investing heavily in AI in so many different areas. The question is, since we need to handle each language specifically, it's not that easy to reuse some of the information they do have. I don't actually have a really good overview of the medical progress here. Of course, Google and the big tech giants are working also in the medical field to a large extent. But I would say that we are doing really well. And I think also what the focus areas that we have, for example, with federated learning and this kind of Edge Lab and other initiatives that we have from AI Sweden, could actually enable Sweden to become a leader in that field. So perhaps if we continue in this direction and supporting it with real operational challenges and those kind of research questions, we have a good chance to be a leader, at least in these small specific fields, I would say.
I think we have started to get the ball rolling. And I think that's both in regards to the kind of collaborations that we have and the hubs that we have for collaboration, but also in building up the competence. We're getting there.
Thank you both. And in terms of culture in hospitals and in healthcare, anything you would like to add there, Magnus? You talked about it, how you collaborate with your IT department, getting understanding for the tools. I mean, the GPU is something any kid would love to have. It's like gaming equipment, essentially. But how do you get there to get a kind of culturally to get the process running?
Yeah, it has been a little bit cumbersome, I would say, but I think specifically about the working with the IT department, we see very positive signals lately. So it seems like it requires like a marketing exercise from my side or from the AI side to actually make sure that they understand. So we, within the organization, we can market our ideas and what we want. And also make sure that the management understands the value and the potential value that might come from the developing AI and these type of collaborations that we have. So I think we are getting there. And I also want to add that I think we have been we have not been in the driver's seat. We have been in the back seat. We have been like a very much of an we have been poor at setting requirements. We have also been quite poor at taking the results and actually transforming them into something useful. So we are building up that type of competence as well in-house now, so we can get more value out of these type of collaborations.
Thank you, Magnus. Anyone else would like to add something, Marcus, in terms of organization and culture, and how do you embrace AI and what it can bring?
Well, one advantage is to stick to the plan. And we did that in Halland for 7 years now, to build up capacity and culture from the bottom up, and focus on what problems need to be solved, and gradually evolve into a data-driven or data-supported healthcare system. And when you add a new initiative like this one, it's not as sci-fi as it might be in other systems that are less AI ready or AI or data ready, I would say. And lots of healthcare systems are not very data ready. So we had the opportunity to work with the senior leadership, politics, administrative leadership for several years now. So they feel confident in actually doing stuff. And the legal team is getting more and more used to these questions. So it's not, they don't go on holiday, the first thing, the reaction they get to this kind of sometimes scary or what used to be scary situations, letting like strangers into the core of your workings is like one of the scariest thing we do in healthcare, which is the sensitive data, taking care of the patients and actually doing stuff that affects the outcome of the patients. That is like the core of our enterprise, and having external experts knowing Python and R and stuff that people never heard of in healthcare is really a cultural journey, and it takes time, but we are there now. So when we say, hey, we need to do BERT on our free text, they say, I don't get it, but sounds important. So let's do it by the book and take the measurements needed, the transparency needed, involve the patient, the people needed, because the playbook is there. Even if you don't understand the case itself, the people in charge, they trust the system now. So, and it's pretty tedious, it's hard work, but it's safe, and that's very important. They trust the playbook.
Thank you, Marcus. And I think one of the deliverables for this project, without going too much ahead, jumping ahead here, is actually to provide a map for how you can act through the landscape, how you can get access or give access to external experts in a safe and secure way as possible. And AI Sweden are working on that. So the teaser for coming webinars, that will actually be subject, the data mapping and ways through in more legal questions. So that will come in coming webinars towards after summer. Is there anyone having any additional questions for our experts? I think no more questions in the chat. I think we're getting better with webinars and doing things on time. Maybe get used to this format after 1 year and more than that. So unless there is no further question, I think it's time for us. We can wrap up. And then I would like to thank our speakers, Marcus, for giving us introduction, showing the possibilities and all the opportunities we have and what you have been doing in Halland for several years before starting the SMS, or I like BERT better, it's easier. We said, let's say BERT, I can do that now. I'd also like to thank Olof and Anders for all the details about model training, the challenges, the type of data we worked with, and the struggle we have there, but also the great achievements made. And Magnus for providing some details on how you operate and how you try to implement this in the hospital, culturally, as well as technically. How do you give data access and how do you do it in a proper way, so to speak. So thank you all for your participation here. And thank you all to you guys listening in to this webinar. I hope you have some, and then we got some additional questions. Jessica, please.
Yes. Okay, so do we need to storage big data in cloud services to work more with AI, like Microsoft Azure?
Anyone feeling happy to answer?
We have gone the other route in this project. We don't move the data. We certainly don't put it on the cloud. No, we don't need to put stuff on the cloud to be able to use AI, but we need to have the compute and the data in one location. So either we need to have computing power where the data is, at the healthcare providers, or we need to move the data to where the computing power is, which could be in the cloud, but in this project, we have not gone that route.
Yeah, I mean, if I just add to that, we are focusing on the model training part right now, and we can handle that rather well without having all the cloud services available. But I would like to say, I think you should not underestimate the value that cloud services like Azure and Google and Amazon do provide. To try to build a similar infrastructure for serving models and being able to scale properly and integrating that into all the systems that we do already have is a big challenge. And I wish that we can start to make use of, Azure can be used on premise as well, with kind of hybrid cloud solutions. And I think that should be something to consider in the future. And if we can make the legal aspects work to keep the data safe and still in the organization and still on premise potentially, but still have access to all the cloud services that we have, I think we could operationalize the results so much more efficiently and safely. So yeah, that's my comment to it.
Thank you. And then our last question. How involved are you with any work with statistical programming, or rather the statistical aspects?
Perhaps I could comment a little bit there, perhaps, because I mean, a lot of the projects we are dealing with are clinical research projects, and their statistics is of course vital. And I think it's important that while we're doing data science and AI and that cool stuff, it's also important that we use the sort of established ways of interpreting and assessing the quality and the outcome of our sort of interventions that we come up with using AI methods. So to some degree, yes, but perhaps we should expand it further, I would say.
I would also like to add that statistical modeling is often referring to a subset of what we do. Machine learning and AI is statistical modeling, but we do it a bit more general with a bit more powerful modeling. So yes, statistics is everywhere, and it's in the modeling.
I can also add a small comment. I mean, it depends on how you define statistics, as Olof said, and others. Some people think statistics is, not including the learning techniques. So that's one way to define statistics. If that's what the person that asked the question meant, I think, if we were to work with text, the traditional rule-based and purely statistical without the learning aspect would not be sufficient to try to understand what the text actually mean. But for other aspects, working with, with more structured data, or if we just want to track how the use for the models are working in the organization once being published and whatnot, then of course that statistical methods is perfectly fine, and you should never use more advanced techniques than necessary. So, but for text, it's rather hard to use more of the traditional statistical approaches like TF-IDF or things like that. So these kind of recent techniques that just come about in the last 3 years with transformers, etc., they have opened up new ways to work with text that I've never seen before. So at least for that part, if we want to understand text, it's nice to be able to use them. But for other aspects, it's of course statistical approaches is perfectly fine and should be used when possible.
Thank you. And that was our final question.
Yes. So thank you very much, all of you participating, and have a great continuing of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice day.
Thank you. Bye.